So, thanks everyone for coming in, and thanks Charles for coming along to talk to us tonight. Obviously, this tasting came about because we all got the Somerton bottle, thought it was an interesting one, and then wanted to try the rest of your range. And yeah, Johnny kindly organised the split for us, and you were kind enough to come along and talk us through. So, um, I'll just let you do your thing tonight. If people put any questions, we're a pretty small group, so
Yeah.
I guess if you just stick your hand up on Zoom controls, and then we can just bring you in and ask any questions that you got. And yeah, Charles, I didn't know what order we were going to go through tonight.
I think we're going to start with the rye because the rye is in the chaos as well. And obviously the bastard, the base of the bastard is rye as well. So the rye it's more or less our house pour. It's what we really are about as a distillery. So everything in the bottle, apart from the barrel influence, is from less than 40 kilometers away from our distillery. So all the grain is bought from old school friends, basically, of the founders of the distillery. So we get the grain off them and they come and dump it off, and we use the grain and they come and collect it afterwards and feed it back to their pigs. So there's a nice little loop with everything. So as with all of our products, all our grain is floor malted in-house. We have 2 big malting lanes where we can do about 50 tons in either one at any given time. So it's quite crazy that we've managed to get up to this quantities in such a short space of time. So they only did the first distillation in 2006. So as one of my friends who runs a business, a whiskey bar, said, that core range, to have that so clearly defined in 15 years is absolutely mental. Right. So I was fortunate enough that they came to me and asked if I would like to help them in London, because there's a couple of my friends who's worked for a lot of whiskey brands and worked in whiskey bars were asked if they knew somebody in London who happened to be Danish and knew and loved whiskey, and both of them said, that's the guy you need. So I got a phone call. I was like, had a nice long conversation, and it's quite funny. We're almost the same age, me and most of the founders. So there's a lot of reference points that we have similar with regards to flavor profiles and food memories and flavor memories. So it's very easy for us to get along and had almost an instant relationship. Like there's just references to like my friends growing up when I have conversations with them, like that goes back, which makes everything a lot easier, I think, even though I've spent 23 years here now. So but it's a great opportunity to have a link back to Denmark again. So yeah, so this is 70% rye and 30% barley, and it's a blend of barrels that are just about 4 years old. It's heavy char American oak, so essentially it's American style rye whiskey. Some would say that a rye at that age is a bit young, but because of the barley, it gets that nice little bit of backbone to support. I absolutely love this. I used to work in a bar that only had American whiskey, and we had about 30 ryes from America, and I still put this in my top 5 of ryes I've ever tried, which is quite mental when it's up against the likes of Thomas H. Handy, for instance.
Yeah, it's really nice, isn't it? What are people sort of getting on the nose from this one?
I've I've had 3/4 of this bottle gone from when I got the Somerton. I really like it. There's the obvious sort of rye bread, but I know I get, and I've shared samples with lots of people on this, and nobody else gets it, but there's like a menthol milk chocolate, almost like a mint arrow I get on the nose.
Funnily enough, I definitely get the mint, and that's quite typical in rye and American style whiskies in general, but also like there's a funny tasting note I saw on our website, and I was like, what? And then I smelled it again, because one of the nose characteristics, they put wine gums, and I was like, oh yeah, I get it. It's right when you open the pack and you stick your nose into the pack of wine gums. It's that almost like gasoline like fruitiness.
And that's what I think about the Mintero as well. Like, Mintero doesn't smell like mint or chocolate. It's almost like a chemically minted chocolate, and it's a little bit like that.
Yeah. No, I think this is absolutely fantastic, and it's been quite interesting because the first lots of bottles I got was just over 3 years old, and this is averaging on a 4, I think, and I can see the difference. And then I got another delivery, and it was a new batch number, and I tried them, and they're still a little bit better again. So it's quite interesting to have that opportunity and see how everything is progressing in the right direction, which is something where most brands, you don't get to experience it unless you end up following a brand very early on. And most of the established brand, there's obviously not an opportunity for that.
So how long have Stauning been around then, Charles?
So they started in 2006. It's quite a funny story. There was a guy, one of the founders was on his way to his parents' summer house for a summer lunch, and he was listening to a radio program about making whiskey. And he was driving through a field of barley, and he was like, hold on a second. We've got some of the best grains in the world. Surely we must be able to make great whiskey. And the following weekend, he had a meeting with 14 of his friends, and who wants to come on a journey and make some whiskey. And 6 of them said yes, and the rest of them are probably crying. Because step by step, it's just been an incredible achievement what they've done, and also what they've managed to achieve, especially considering that they've done everything themselves and not really reached out a lot. It's more like, when they've had distillates, they've given samples of the new makes to people, and they've gone like, wow, this new make is really good. So, but just to have that core range after 15 years is, that's quite unique, I think. Even McMurray is just, as much as they do good, a lot of it is just random bottles that comes out, and it's like, oh yeah, we have this, and there's this amount of bottles. Oh, we have this, and they haven't geared it in the same way towards having a core line.
Can I ask you? It says obviously it's 70% rye, 70% malted barley,
70% rye.
So 70% malted rye. Is that made in the American style of, like a mash being done 70%, 30%, and then distilled, or is it kept separate and then?
No, it's one big mash. Yeah. So there's a lot of rye and barley in Denmark. So especially rye is like, it's all our bread has some element of rye in it. So it was always going to be something that was going to be done. Originally, they wanted to do a single malt, but then they realized that they would be better to do something that was unique to the local area. So that's why there's such a big provenance force on the locality, and everything is local except for the barrels, because it's like the original idea was to recreate 1973 3 Artberg, but they soon realized that that was an impossible task. And also, why try to replicate Scotland if we can make something that's truly unique to us and showcase to the world? So a lot of that has come from that. Let's do something local. And also with the rye being so integrated in Danish culture, it's just, it would be silly not to do it. I mean, so the grains in all of Denmark is some of the best you'll find anywhere. So I know Four Roses did have a hard time at one point sourcing corn that was good enough for their bourbon in America, and they ended up buying Danish corn, and they said it was the best distillate they'd ever made. So, and that's from the same areas from where our distillery is. So the quality is there 100%, and it's a long history of farming and using land to the best of what the land can produce.
So are you the only Danish distillery?
No, there is loads. So we were one of the first 2, but there was another distillery that beat us by about a week with the release. But there is 14 or 15 whiskey distilleries in Denmark now, which is quite crazy when you think of the size of Denmark. I mean, the population is about 7 million. So that's not including gin distilleries and the Danish sugar factory, which is the Rakavik and stuff like that. So
I don't know who else on here was on when Somerton did the tour of the distillery, but it was absolutely fascinating, and you can see like the influence of the friends who were like engineers. But the thing I took away from it was they don't do anything by half. I mean, they've not done stuff because it's cheap to do it.
No,
it's full bells and whistles production.
It's mental. I can't wait to go back. I've only been there for about half an hour. It was 2 weeks before I started working for them, and my girlfriend was very pissed off, to put it mildly. We'd been for my mother's birthday, and I was like, we need to go to the distillery on the way to the airport, because he's like, do you have to do it? It's like, it's stupid. I'm so close, and this could make or break whether I get the job or not. So we had, instead of going for 1 hour and 25 minutes straight to the airport, we went 2.5 hours in the opposite direction, and then was there for about 25 minutes, and then 2 hours and 45 minutes to get to the airport. So my girlfriend was not pleased, because she had to be up at, I think it was 4:30 in the morning for an 11 o'clock flight. It's like, I was like, but it was so close. Like, obviously having to physically drive there doesn't make it easier, but it just made sense. And seeing that distillery in the flesh as well made me want to work for them even more, because like there's so many small details where you're like, this is just perfection. Like every single door into the distillery is made with alligator char wood. It's like this, you don't see it from the distance until you're right by the door. All the rest of the building isn't wood, but just the doors, all the doors in the distillery, alligator char. And just that they've done it, everything so different as well. Like 24 pot stills is like, sorry, what? And that was purely done not to lose too much character compared to the original distillate. So the original stills were 2 stills in 2 slightly different sizes, I think 215 and 230 liters, which were built with random parts bought online. And having started to build a character from those small stills and a fan base based on that character, there was the discussion, should we get 2 big stills, or should we get a lot of small stills to have a better chance of retaining that character? And the decision was like, yeah, let's do small. Let's just get loads of them. And when you go to the distillery, it looks absolutely insane. It's like, I don't think there's anywhere else that comes close to it. It's like people say when you've seen one distillery, you've seen them all. But then you walk in there and you're like, hold on a second.
It was really strange when we got the tour. It was at night, so there was nobody else there, and it was the pot still room was actually quite eerie. It was like, you know, the scene in Aliens when all the eggs are in the room. That's what it looked like with all the pot still sitting.
And it's also because of Alex's design. So Alex and 2 or 3 of the others are architectural engineers. So he's designed the walls so they absorb the sound. So there's a very famous Danish musician who did an acoustic concert in there, and he said it was the best sound he'd had playing live music in 60 years, because the walls are built to absorb the sounds of everything. So when all the stills are running, you can still stand in the middle of the floor and have a normal conversation, which is not normal for a distillery, that you can talk to people when you're in the middle of it. So some of the thing of the innovation side is just come of them being engineers, but also not having restrictions of how things could be done, because it's just 9 normal guys who wants to make whiskey, and they don't have any preconceptions of how you make things. So some of the innovation they've done, there's been other distilleries coming to have a tour, and they're like, hold on, what's this? Where did you get this? Like, oh, guy down the road made it. It's like, who decides? Like, oh, we did. And they're like, what? So there's a mixture for the wash when the grain comes off, where that they've designed as a blend between one of the spinning machines that get the skin off the mink and a washing machine. And we've tripled the stuff we get off from the mash, because normally people are like, rye is too tricky. You can't separate the grain from the wash, from the mash for the wash. And they're like, now because of this, we've tripled the amount of the mash that we can actually use. So people, when they see that, they're like, what is that? And that was like after a conversation with somebody, they were at the Monaco Grand Prix as guest of Johnny Walker. And then they drove back, and 2 of the guys who were engineers sat in the back of the car and had a conversation about this and started making drawings. And they designed the whole thing in the back of the car driving from Monaco. It's like one of my favorite things actually of the distillery, which is like, what? It makes so much sense when you think about it. So they had the original distillery. They had this little thing with spokes on that was twisting the grain when it was molting on the floor. And they built a bigger version of it for the new distillery. And Alex, one of the founders, was at a conference in America, and they talked about how enzyme generation works with floor malting compared to nature. So in nature you have wind and you have rain, so you get constant water and the wind turns the grains. So the thing that they built to turn the grain was kind of mimicking wind, but most distilleries are only on 65% of the enzyme production in nature. And Alex came back and explained about this, how nature is so much better. And one of the guys went, well, we just fucking make it rain then. So they built an irrigation system into it. And now we are 95% of what nature does with enzyme production, which is, we're about 30% higher than any distillery in the world. And that's just because these are geeky engineers who always look for a solution, and they're not tied into like, oh, this is how things are done. So there's no limit to what can be achieved and improved, because there's a natural curiosity. And that's one of the things that inspired me to work for them as well. It's that natural curiosity, because I've always had, like, when I go into places and they're like, oh, that's a new beer, that's a new whiskey, I always try something new. So that helps when you work for guys like this. There's always that curiosity aspect. And I think that's really driving us forward with improving constantly. Any questions?
See, can I ask, this is obviously part of your core range now, but because it's a young whiskey, if I buy this in 4 years' time, it's going to taste different, right? You're not trying to keep it the same.
Well, the age is slowly going up, so I don't know how that is going to work, because I've seen 7-year-old bottles and I haven't tried them, but I know a friend of mine had, there was for a bartender event in Paris, they bottled a cask of 7-year-old rye whiskey, and my friend said that that's the best rye whiskey he's ever tasted. I saw one at Christmas for a German bottler, and I was like, should I buy it? Should I not? And I was like, yeah, I'll buy it. And then by then it was sold out. But that was 7-year-old unpeated malt whiskey from a Sauternes cask. And the color of it was absolutely mental. It was so dark. It was like, you don't expect that from Denmark, because you don't get whiskies that dark after 7 years in Scotland. So I'm curious now. I've said, please try and keep some for longer, but it might take a bit longer, because we've added the 4th warehouse now, and it's nearly full. And I think the 5th one is finished being built and is being filled. So there's obviously been the challenge of building up stock. So this couldn't happen until we had enough stock to switch from a 500ml bottle to a 700ml bottle. There needed to be enough stock available, because it'd be really silly to end up in a situation where you change bottle size and then because of that you end up running out.
Do you think if Stauning had went down the route of like a more traditional, so like, well, I mean, you know, just doing the previous established methods, not, you know, how you're talking about the mash, how they get more of the mash, or for the maltings, how they've done changes there, do you think they would have been as successful without making these changes?
I don't think so, because it would have just been the same as everywhere else. Mm-hmm. So like with that 24 stills, it's really unique. And if you've seen pictures of the setup, it looks amazing. It's one thing, but it's also, it was in many ways a stupid way of doing things, but it kind of made sense, because, oh, if we get two 8,000 litre stills, are we going to retain the character from the smaller stills? And it's one of my favorite things of all of Stauning's history is actually them doing it, because we've resurrected parts of whiskey processes that would have died. So we asked up in Scotland if they could do direct fire stills, and we're like, we need 24 of them. And they're like, we don't do direct fire stills. It's like, there's nobody who can do them anymore. And they're like, well, we want direct fire stills, so we'll go somewhere else. We'll figure it out. And 4 weeks later, they called us up and I was like, did you find somebody to do the stills? And we're like, no, not yet. Why? It's like, oh, we found a solution. It's like, what's that? It's like, we spoke to some of the old guys. We're putting them back on the payroll. So they rehired people who were between 86 and 93 years old. And they came back in and taught all the kids how you make a direct fire still. And when the kids, so to speak, came and instilled the distillery, they were thanking all the founders of Stauning. It's like, thank you so much. This has been the best project ever. all these old guys that taught us so much, and all this knowledge because of you has survived.
I think just for saying that, and that's some like a really, really cool story to hear. Like, you know, even like Scottish still makers get, you know, only learning the craft better because of Danish distillery.
Yeah, it's really heartwarming for me, because when you taste them side by side, when you've had something with like even our new make, like I used to work in a gin distillery, and obviously that was just a small still with a heat jacket on. You just don't get that oiliness. There's something magical when you can really fire up the temperature. So there's a little hint of color in our new make, and people are like, oh, so it's smoked after distillation. Like, no, that's because shit gets hot in there. It burns, it sticks to the side, so it actually doesn't come out completely clear. And people are like, yeah, but it's distilled. It's like, yeah, but there's a Maillard reaction that happens inside, and that does carry over. Should we go to the next one?
Sounds good to me. I think I'm not going to get any arguments from around this crowd.
Nah. So let's go to the bastard. Have I got here? It's moved. So the bastard is in many ways the cousin of the rye. So it's essentially the same mash bill, but after 3 years, it was moved to a cask that previously held mezcal, which is a bit of a funny one, because mezcal per se doesn't necessarily get aged that much. What usually happens with mezcal is the mezcal makers will buy a cask together, and then they all have the cask for a couple of days, and they just leave it in there to like rest, because they need a big vessel to rest it in. So as such, mezcal isn't aged, but there would have just been like multiple different mezcal distillates in there for a couple of days, just to chill and mellow out. So I tried this the first time 2 years ago, and it was just over 2 years old, and it was cask strength, and I was like, that's a bit weird and it's not for me. And then when I got this at Christmas, I was like, man, not so sure. I think I expected something different, but then when I did a tasting the other day for 2 of my friends, I was like, wow, this is really fucking tasty. There's some really interesting vegetable notes, and there's a lot of caramel in there for some reason, which is completely different from regular rye. What's this question?
Oh, it's Alan with the 24 stills. Was there worries about the running costs of these? As I would imagine, it's not quite 1/24th of the power for heating a smaller still compared to a larger heating.
No, so this is because it's natural gases, the cost isn't that crazy, and also with the new design of distillery, we absorb all the heat from the stills, and it gets redistributed as heating in other parts of the distillery, and also converted into hot water and stuff for the distillery. So the cost itself actually pays for itself again by being reused.
I think Phil's struggling to pick out a lot after the previous rye. I have to say this one's almost it's quite like fizzy, effervescent on the tongue, and it's got a little bit of heat that sits behind that. I think is I find it weird. It's slightly low in ABV, but it feels a lot hotter than the regular rye.
but there's definitely a lot of that chocolate that was mentioned before in this one.
So you were mentioning about all the warehouses you're building. Do they have any sort of special technical details? Are they racked or palletized or?
They are just palletized. There is a staff bar in between all of them somewhere. There's a video on Instagram where they show how to get to it. There's a little maze going between the stacks of barrels to get in there. I think it's been kept pretty plain, actually. I've never even asked this question because it's one of those questions that you forget to ask, because once I finally get to go there again and do a proper tour, they keep telling you, it's like, yeah, as soon as you can travel, you're coming here for a few days. I'm like, yeah, I can't wait. But when? So when I'm there, I'll definitely learn a lot more, because there's so many little details that tends to be forgotten. Like,
yeah, I'm only asking because I'm about to record a video about different warehouse styles. So yeah, it's kind of fresh in my mind. But yeah, it's not something you think about first of all, is it?
I don't think there's any temperature control, actually, which as well wouldn't make that much sense in Denmark to have a temperature control. It more makes sense if you have super hot climates, I suppose, so it doesn't get too hot. So Scotland is pretty much non-temperature controlled, isn't it? So, and Copenhagen is aligned with Aberdeen, so we're just north of that. So yeah, temperature fluctuations aren't that crazy, like.
So it would be possible to age something for quite a while then, compared to, you know, I've done a Paul John tasting recently, and you know, anything over 3 years and you're really chancing your arm. So yeah, so Copenhagen, it would be on a par really with Scotland, yeah, temperature wise. That's cool.
Yeah, so I'm curious, because obviously we had the guys from Distill Ventures home, and they had some Diageo guys with them, and I'm like, oh, about 5 seems right for you. And I was like, that doesn't make sense for me, especially with the rye, because I know from American whiskey that you get a curve where it peaks and then it really falls off and it's really awful, but then it kind of recovers again. But it's finding out how long that curve is it's a chance you have to take, and it's like, is it going to recover again? Because now it's starting to taste bad, and it's like, so I really want to try something that's older, because I know with that 7-year-old rye that my friend had, that was like, I'm jealous that I haven't tried it. So it's quite funny, because he had one left over at his bar. My boss came into his bar. It's like, should we have some of that? And he's like, oh, I'm not opening it. It's like, well, if you don't open it now, I'm just going to take it back with me again, because you got it for free. It's like, it's made to be drunk.
So
where a lot of chocolate on the palate.
Where does this one come from?
Sorry, Johnny.
Sorry, I was asking where the name came from for this one.
For this one, for the Bastard.
Is there a story behind that?
So it started with Curious, which ended up having a dog on it. So that was made by a friend of theirs who's a tattoo artist. So because it already had the dog, they started thinking about names that would tie in with the dog. So that's how Bastard came up. So there is the new one, El Clásico, which has just come out, which is vermouth cask, Spanish vermouth cask. So they decided to call that one El Clásico because that's the first reference in written Spanish to the Manhattan cocktail. I forgot what the name was I suggested. There's there's a neighborhood in the northeast part of Manhattan where there used to be wild dogs. And I was like, oh, let's call it that. Because it ties in nicely. Something wood, wild wood or something. And I was like, oh. So it ties in with the wormwood as well, and wood and aging. But they decided to go for the classical. Alex was like, I'm really sorry, your dreams didn't come true. Because like, I finally get to name a whiskey. It's like, not this time. But that's always a big problem though with naming the whiskeys, is that there's 9 founders and they kind of all have to agree on a name. So that's always a battle. It's like, you can be best of friends, but if there's 9 of you who have to agree, then it can be tricky.
Getting some good notes in the chat. We've got creamy citrus, agave, and Ben can really taste the mezcal on the finish. Quite a nice long finish on that one.
It's really weird because I don't understand where all this caramel comes from. Because it must just be, I don't have to reach out the barrel or something. Because it's not a characteristic that I find in any of the other whiskies.
I actually think it's like drinking, like for the first couple of seconds you put it in your mouth, it's like a fruity mezcal, and then it's the whiskey part of it actually only comes in the back for me. It's not immediate, it just comes in the back with that caramel.
I more get the mezcal on the nose than anything. But there's a sweetness in there that I don't know where it comes from. But I know we don't add any sweetness, so.
Sorry, I missed the start of this. I was on the phone with my dad. But how old is this?
So it's 3 years in the New American Oak, and then 3 months in the mezcal cask. But yeah, it's quite unusual. Like, I think this is the closest we have to a Mackmyra whiskey in our lineup. They've done some proper weird ones. Like, they put mulled wine into a barrel for 3 months and then bint the mulled wine and put whiskey in it, which was really weird but tasted really good.
Do you sell your new make separately anywhere, or is it just the spirit?
We have this, so it's called Curious. So it's a new make of the rye, but it's been smoked with peats and heather pre-distillation. There are some bottles roaming around in the UK, but we've changed to this size bottle. They've just released new bottles today in Denmark, but I haven't seen them all here yet, and I can't wait because I'll try and see if I can get it up on my phone and it will show. So it's got a beautiful new frosted bottle. Don't know if you can see that. I need to find one on a black background. Let me do that on Instagram. So yeah, I keep saying, it's like, I need that bottle here. I need to hit all the places that do brunches and get them to put Bloody Curious on the menu, because it's essentially a smoked vodka.
You'll have to tip us off when it hits the shelves.
I was going to say that's the next bottle split, isn't it, Johnny? Get that one in.
Well, I'm waiting on getting miniatures, so hopefully I can get you some of them. So that should make it easier. It's a bit tricky So yeah, it's is that better? Can you see that? It's a bit tricky with the reflection. So it's a frosted glass bottle.
Mm.
So still the same logo and everything. But we still have the same problem in the UK that it says whiskey, but it's crossed out, and everybody's fine with it except for over here. They're like, that it's crossed out is not good enough. It still says whiskey. So stickers for the UK. Censored.
Can you see through from the other side that it still says whiskey with a sticker over
Yes.
it?
You see that? You can just about see it. I mean, I can see it on my screen, so.
Yeah.
You see it bottom left, yeah.
So yeah. I absolutely love that because it's so surprising. Like, it's so different. And I keep forgetting to ask them if they've actually put any in the barrel of that, because that's the rye that's peated, and that in its own right is very unusual. Like, I've had one peated bourbon and it was not nice, and I had such high hopes because I was like, wow, this could be my dream whiskey, and then it was rubbish. It's like I found out somewhere online, and then 6 months I was looking for it, and then somebody's like, well, they have it in amateurs. And I ran straight to amateurs and was bitterly disappointed. So we're going to move on to chaos now. So chaos has been a bit of a problem for us in the best way possible. Like, we've been trying to enter it into competitions to see if we could get some awards for it, but they don't know how to classify it, the global whiskey community, because it's not a single malt, because there's a blend of rye and whiskey and single malt whiskey in, but it can't be a blend either because it's from a single distillery, and we don't want it to just be lumped into a world whiskey category. So I think the last time they ended up putting it into grain whiskey, which at the same time is not quite the right configuration for it either. So that is a blend of 3 casks of the rye with 1 cask of peated single malt, 1 cask of unpeated single malt, and a cask of heather smoked single malt. So the name Chaos comes from, during the Depression, there was a guy running for Prime Minister, and he did get elected, and his name was Stauning. So he shares the surname with the village that our distillery is in, and his election slogan that he put in every train station in Denmark on big posters was, you have 2 choices, Stauning or Chaos. So this blend, being a bit chaotic when you look at it, is our homage to him. I absolutely adore this. Every time I try it, it's different and new, but familiar in the same way. When my friends were here the other day and they tried, they're like, if you hadn't told us that would have been something, a new release from Johnny Walker. It's like, it slits right in there. And my friend works for Diageo, and she said that. She's like, you could have fooled me. So it's quite unusual, and there is a bit of smoke in it, but it's very gentle.
I think it's a great dram, isn't it? It's very interesting. Something I'd like to have on my shelf just to get out for people.
There's a lot of like, wait, you think you know what it is, and then something changes on your palate, and you're like, hold on a sec.
It's an interesting journey. Like the way it goes as well, like that. There's a sweetness coming, I guess, more from the malt and the barrels. There's like the unpeated malt. There's that little bit of smoke, and then it just turns into like the spice from the rye at the very end comes in. You're like, every time you're like, oh right, we're getting this. It changes to something else. You're just constantly get surprised by it.
But it also changes from sip to sip how you get the flavor profile. I don't know if you've ever tried High West Campfire.
No.
So High West are based in Utah, and their Campfire is a blend of rye whiskey and bourbon with 5% of peated Scotch, which for contractual reasons they can't say, but it's most likely Bruichladdich. And it's so weird, like when you taste it, if you take 3 sips, first you get the sweetness of the bourbon, then you get the spice of the rye, and then you get the peatiness of the Scotch. And it's such a mind fuck. And this has some elements of that, but not quite to that extreme. But it is a little bit like, oh, each sip is slightly different, which makes it a lot of fun to sit with as well.
Each sip is so different. I was only going to drink, like, I was drinking like half the samples tonight, but I just poured all the chaos into my glass.
Good man. Now you need to buy a bottle next. Yeah, I love this, and I love how different it is. Like, I really need to get it to my friend. He's in Japan distilling, but when he had his leaving party going to Japan, and we were in a pub, and I saw that they had the High West Campfire. I was like, I'm going to teach him a lesson. So I got a shot, and I got 3 glasses, and I split it evenly in 3 glasses. I went up. It's like, this isn't. I'm going to treat you to that. It's like, whichever one you like most of these 3, I'll buy you a full dram. And he knows them all and tasted them all and considered them all. And he's like, oh, I like this one. And I was like, oh, that's fine. And then I poured everything into the same glass. Like, what are you doing? It's like, it's the same whiskey. And he's like, what? No. It's like, yeah. It's like, I need to see that bottle. and a couple of weeks later, one of our friends who'd been there sent me a message like, what was that whiskey that you fucked with Alex's head with at his leaving party? It's like, I need to get one. So this is a bit in the same vein with that. Like, it's just fun. Like,
Here we got Phil agreeing that it's a journey dram. Some umami flavours, definitely honey, wafts of smoke, and he said he thinks the same with the rye that we tried first of all, sort of similar where it changes and develops, and each time you go back to it, something different. We got Ben came in with pine needles, heather, honey, peat, like climbing a Munro. That's a true Scot there. With his Munro bagging.
I'm getting a lot of the honey now that you've mentioned it.
And then like a peaty hot chocolate with spiciness that kicks in on the finish. So yeah, I think this one's probably gone down quite well with us all.
Like, I love this. The first time I tried it, I was like, hold on, that's a bit strange. But since then, every time I try it, I'm just like more and more infatuated with it. It's like, it's just very unique, but at the same time reminds you of so many other great drams.
It's really strange in that, like, that comment I made, like, get that real malty chocolate taste, but then this huge spice kick comes in. Then actually, if you don't drink anything for the next like 30 seconds, I'm left with that mouthfeel of, like, you know, when you suck a bit of chocolate and you get that kind of chocolatey mouthfeel. Like, that's what I get like 30 seconds after I've
The creaminess.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that comes as well from the direct fire, because you do get more oily distillates from the direct fire. Like, who was it? There's somebody in Japan who's in the process of switching all their stills because they realized that they made a big mistake when they changed to steam jackets, and now they're changing them back again because they lost all that oily characters. It's like, it's quite funny. I moved house in December and I finally have a gas stove again after God knows how many years without one. And being able to cook that, it shows some of those things as well, with like compared to not having direct heat. It's like our old stove was absolutely rubbish and slow. But even so, even if you use like pre-boiled water and stuff, I could make a pasta dish in like half an hour. And then we moved here, and my girlfriend was like, "Oh, I'm just gonna go and do some." He's like, "You're gonna do the pasta?" It's like, "Yes." And I came and gave her a plate 10 minutes later. It's like, "What?" It's like, "Yeah, that's direct fire. That's like, you can speed up the process and you can get everything done quicker because it's so much more intense."
So
I can't wait to go and.
I was gonna say, is it possible to visit the distillery as a? I think you were about to say you can't wait to go over to the distillery, but
it is possible. It is possible. They're still doing tours now. I'm waiting to find out the details for here, but I know in Denmark they're running a Father's Day campaign where I think maybe it's just a virtual tour that's included in buying a bottle, but there's definitely, you can go on tours. Like we're doing tours now in Denmark again. They've reopened a lot of things in Denmark, so distillery tours is one of them, but it's a bit of a weird one to do a like socially distanced tour, and like you can't have as many people on the tour, so
I would say, like, I've sat in on loads of distillery tours since lockdown virtually and stuff,
Yeah.
and kind of like you said, Jules, at the start, like, I don't know, they're kind of much of a muchness, but
Yeah.
I have to say that Somerton tour of Stauning was so fascinating, especially because Alex was doing it as well.
Yeah.
You know, he just had the insight to everything. It was absolutely fascinating.
I really like Alex. So he was my first point of contact, and I like the way that he deals with things head on. So when we first talked, and he was like, "Yeah, I'd like to give you a job, but let me come to London and we'll see." And my girlfriend was launching a book she'd written on the day that he was coming to London, and I was like, "It's not the best day, but because I have this book launch I need to go and make drinks for and stuff. But I can come and meet you for like an hour or something." And my girlfriend was like, "Oh, can you not just meet him tomorrow?" I was like, "No, he's coming to see me. Then he's going for a drink, and then he's going to his hotel, and then he's flying back in the morning." It's like, fuck off. He's not coming just to see you. It's like, yeah, he is. He's literally coming to see me for half an hour, 45 minutes, just to meet me face to face, to confirm that he wants to give me the job. It's like, so that he's willing to do that, it speaks volumes as well, like, of how they do things. Like, there's a personal touch and wanting to ensure that runs through everything.
So, how many countries is Stauning available in? Is it quite wide across Europe, or mainly UK and Denmark at the moment?
So there is France, Germany, Italy. The rye was supposed to have come out in the US in February 2020. That obviously didn't happen for obvious reasons. I think Spain might have it as well, but definitely Germany, France, and Italy, and obviously the UK. But yeah, it's getting easier. People are getting more open to trying world whiskies, whereas 10 years ago, if you gave somebody a whiskey that wasn't Scots, American, or Irish, or Japanese, then you'd be like, nah. So it's testing, but it's going in the right way. Like one of my my favorite thing ever with Stauning was doing Whiskey Live. And because the first day we did it, we had about 100 people coming up to the store and asking if they could try our stuff and asking if they'd tried us before, if they'd heard about us. We had 100 people the first day go, no, but we asked somebody what's the most interesting thing you've tried, and they said go find the Danes, which is absolutely mind-blowing. To have 100 people like that, it's like that absolutely blew my mind that we had that perception. It did help that I had a lot of cask samples underneath the counter with cask strength port barrels.
Are you looking forward to getting back to face-to-face festivals and that sort of thing?
Yes, very much so. But also, I'm also very apprehensive. Like, I don't want to get carried away with hope, because God knows this government hasn't been good at sorting things out. Like, for somebody who wanted to take control of their borders, they've not been very good at doing that. So I'm hoping that everything will still go to plan. I am booked in for, I think, 3 festivals now, plus a trade event. So obviously, if I can't work, then I can't work. So yeah, no, it's been an anxious wait. Like I helped a friend last weekend and the weekend before in a blues bar, and they had live music, and it was so weird to like be in a room full of people with live music and serving, and yeah, it took a bit of getting used to. But yeah, it's like, obviously, as nice as online tastings are, and to many extents it's more personal because you can fit in a lot more. It's not quite the same as doing in person, face to face.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
I got my bottle of rye through Somerton, as a lot of people did, and I have to admit, when it arrived, I took it out of the box and went, "What the hell is this?" You know, no idea. But it's garnered significant interest on the back of Somerton, and everyone tweeting about it and talking about it and having online tastings. Have you seen an uptake in sales on the back of that Somerton Club bottling?
I don't actually know, because I am not involved in that back end of the business. I know how many bottles were sent out because I do get the sales figures, but from those sales figures to what has come because of it, it's very hard to track as well. Like, I know for our sales figures for the month, it was included separately, because if we put that sales figure in with the people from the Somerton Club into the actual sales, it would give a very skewed picture of what our actual sales were. So I know that they'd kept it separate for that reason. So there was a new column this month where it's like, oh, that's the Somerton Club, and that's it. And that's
it's definitely been a good PR exercise, though. I think personally, I think it's been.
Well, a lot of these things are like to some extent. We were with the relaunch we did. Actually, that's how you ended up also with the tour with Alex, with the Somerton Club, was that Alex was supposed to come over here, and we had this very Scandinavian looking space in Shoreditch, and I was supposed to host all the bar people, and he was supposed to host all the journalists. And then Denmark got put on a no-fly list, so he couldn't come. And we made the decision very quick that all the journalists are going to do a virtual tour with you in Denmark. And I'm going to host all the bar people in London. And then journalists can do it from home and blah, blah, blah. And all the journalists said the same thing. It's like, best distillery tour ever, best virtual tasting ever, because so different because of the way it is as well with the distillery and moving through the distillery. Because usually when you see an online distillery tour, it's very stationary and less personal in a way as well, because it's just the bloke standing in front of the still with 3 bottles of whiskey. So they don't actually show any of the processes. And I've always had an issue with that, which is another thing I love about Stauning is the openness about everything we do. And it's like when people come from other distilleries, they can see whatever they want to see. We don't have any secrets because there's so many distilleries that don't want to show stuff. And it's like, what's the problem here? Because nobody can recreate what other distilleries do because all stills are different and all water sources are different and all warehouses age differently. So you can't physically replicate somebody else's whiskey as much as you'd like to. So even the grain that you get from batch to batch is so different that it's physically impossible. You'd have to do such a massive scale and do a blend for it to actually replicate something. Does that make sense? So, barbecue time. This one, when we released Pete, I had been hoping for something in the vein of one of our first releases, which is Roy, which is the Danish for smoke. And I said to Alex, I was like, I like Roy better. Can we do something that's closer to that? It's like, we're already doing that. We weren't happy with the Pete either. And this is what they came up with, and it's absolutely mental. So it's a blend of peated whiskies that have been aged in first fill bourbon, first fill Jamaican rum, heavy tart New American oak, and then there's a cask of heather smoke, the Madeira cask, thrown in there just for fun. And when I first tried it, I was like, holy shit, this is like drinking barbecue sauce put in whiskey form. So another interesting fact with our locality is that the way we source our peats is through the local museum, because they've got access to the peat pits because they do excavations. And you can't just go and dig for peats because you can accidentally release too much CO2 and kill yourself. So the peats, they can't, that's through the museum, and that hasn't changed. It's quite funny. I don't think there's any other distillery in the world that source peats through their local museum.
So it's quite interesting with the heather smoked barrel, because Matt Mirror obviously used juniper branches to give their peat a bit of a kick. So I take it you get lots of heather near where you're distilling.
So heather grows all along the coast in the sand dunes, and heather is one of the things that over time will break down and compost and become peats. So there is a link between the two, which is very natural. But the heather compared to the peats give a much sweeter smoke and also a more floral smoke. But yeah, it's very much a characteristic of of the local environment with the sand dunes and everything. So everything goes back to the local environment. Like the outline of the distillery is what is on the bottle, the triangular shape, but that in turn was based on the fisherman huts that's all the way up the coast, because we needed to, architecturally, we needed to have something that wouldn't piss the local people off. So people in that part of Jutland, they're like very traditional, and it's like they don't like you to upset the apple cart. So it's like, you can build stuff, but it better not mess up with everything else that's around. It needs to fit in. So everything has a place in that area. And
do they always, with this and probably with the chaos, because they're so, I guess, unique with their makeup, did they come up with a concept and then build that, or have they experimented on the way? Was it sculpted from the very beginning, or is it just chance that they ended up with kind of these finished products?
I think it's just been pot luck, really. So this one was the peat. We weren't happy. Like, I tried the peat and I was disappointed. And I was like, we had one called Røg, which is the Danish word for smoke, which was a heather smoked Oloroso cask blended with a peat smoked Oloroso cask. And when I tried that, it was one of the first samples I got. I absolutely lost my mind, because I was like, this is as good as Caolila Distiller's Edition Muscatel cask. And I was like, this is not possible. Like, and a friend of mine gave it to the master blender for William Grant, and he literally told my friend, fuck off. You can't tell me this is less than 5 years old. Fuck off. It's like, for the master blender of William Grant to say that, it's like, then you know you've got some good stuff in your hands. And so the chaos, I think, that was just playing around, because these are just 9 guys making whiskey as a hobby. You know, now it's a business, but it's not all of them that works in the business. But when it started out, it was like they didn't have whiskey blending knowledge or experience, so, and they didn't seek it out. So they just, let's see how it goes if we put this with this and with this. And I don't think people would use a rye whiskey normally as a blend, or let alone a base in a whiskey like Chaos. You know, definitely not have half of the blend to be a rye whiskey. It's not what you'd expect from anybody. So that again goes back to not being restricted by tradition and previous knowledge and experience. So it's like all the guys who run distills, it's people who've been trained up in the distillery by people who've learned to do it themselves. So it goes all back to that same thing. Local people doing local things, and like, let's see what happens. Let's have fun.
I think it's probably everyone's dream in here tonight to start a distillery with 8 of their mates. But if you were to describe sort of Stauning's philosophy in a sentence, what would you put?
Ooh, that's a good question. Okay. So I think there's 2 cornerstones. One is the curiosity, but the other one is the locality. So my friend was writing an article about Scandinavian whiskey for Whiskey Magazine, and he asked for a quote, and it came out a bit wanky, but it kind of makes sense. It's that thing with like, why replicate Scottish or Japanese whiskey if we can make something that's true to our local nature and something that's unique to us and showcase that. So peat is that's the terroir in a bottle with the peat and the header. Obviously, the casks have to come from somewhere, but that's the whole essence of the distillery. Is that thing was like everything that's there. There's the barley, there's the heather, there's the salt of the seawater, and there's the peats. It's all what's local, and a lot of it goes back to that things like, what can we do here that's unique to us? That's essentially Stauning. What can we do that's unique to us? If you're going to try and copy somebody else, then you're never going to be the best. Like,
I think for me, like, lockdown has just opened my eyes to what's around the world and how many different whiskies and the different flavours and stuff. And, you know, you can buy a million scotches, can't you? But like you say, you can only buy one Stauning. And I've tried Braunstein as well. Had a really, like, the most sherried whiskey I've ever had from them as a like a private bottling. But yeah, I think Stauning there's such good flavours within it, and I've enjoyed all the drams tonight. But I think I
really want to try that one from Foon that's been smoked with nettles. Like what? Smoked with nettles? And that's such a random thing as well, because the guy who did it, he was like, oh yeah, how did you come up with that idea? It's like, oh, my mum used to smoke cheese with nettles. And I was like, okay, that's a different approach. So it's like, and I think that's the thing with Mackmyra and as well, and some of the other Danish whiskies. A lot of it is like, we don't care what everybody else does. It's like, we're going to do what we do and try and make something that's unique and something that tastes good. So that's the thing. Like, I remember my friends used to run Artesian in the Langham Hotel in London. It was the best cocktail bar in the world for like 4 out of 5 years for a period. And they were always asked about trends and like blah, blah, blah. And it's always the same thing. It's like, we don't follow trends. It's like, if you try to follow trends, you're already 3 months behind. It's like, you need to do your own thing, focus on what you want to do and do it well. Then let other people do what they want and follow. But if you start following other people and try to replicate what other people do, you're always going to end up second best. So you need to figure out what's good for you and what works for you and what's unique for you. And that's a much better selling point than trying to recreate Artback from 73. It's like, actually, we're much better off doing something that's unique to us and showcase what's good about where we are in the world.
There's a bit of chat about restaurants in the chat there. Have you tried the cask that Noma bought?
No, but I know that they're getting more as well. So Noma has had a lot. So Noma was actually one of our first big supporters. Noma, when they first tried Stauning, they binned their entire whiskey list. And for 4 years, the only whiskey you could get at Noma was Stauning. And now they have, for the last 2 or 3 years, they've had Mackmyra as well, 1 or 2 bottles. And what's the Loch Fyne or whatever it's called? There's another Danish whiskey. So that's the only 3 whiskies you can get at Noma now. And
but am I right in saying they bought an entire cask off Stauning though? So it's the only place you can get that cask is in Noma.
They probably would have, yes. They've just been at the distillery for 2 days, actually. I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but they've been there for 2 days testing stuff and tasting stuff. So, yeah, they left this morning. Our new marketing manager told me that. Like, oh, yeah, they were just here. It's like, you should come as well. It's like, I want to, but yeah.
It's a pretty incredible, what's the word I'm looking for? Pretty incredible endorsement that a restaurant voted best restaurant in the world recently is
But that
buying a
goes,
cask of
goes
whiskey
back
off
to
you.
like, it may not, when they first took it on, it may not have been the best whiskey in the world, but it was something that was unique and local. So it was very much the ethos of how the restaurant started, which wasn't, we're going to be the best restaurant in the world. Their ethos was, we're going to make the best food we possibly can with what we have here. So there's a lot of similarities between Stauning and Noma in that respect. It's not about being the best in the world. It's about making the best we physically can with what we have available. And that's a natural process that if you follow it and you stick to it, you will end up somewhere good. How's everybody liking the barbecue sauce?
Been really enjoying it. I think, like I was going to say, just out of originally, I was going to say something like probably like the most interesting non-Scotch peated whiskey I've tried in a while. But to say that isn't maybe necessarily fair to it, because it's probably just out of what I've tried in a while, probably just the most interesting peated whiskey I've had in time. Like, you naturally want to say compare it to Scotch whiskey or take it like out of that category, but even in that category it does very, very well.
Mm-hmm. I find this absolutely fascinating. Like, it's like when I got this bottle, I was like, oh, it's a bit early. I was like, I'll just try a little bit, and I had to go somewhere for a meeting as well, and ended up having a pretty full dram because it's like there's so much going on as well. Like, yeah, I'm still baffled by the quality of all these whiskies when you look at the fact that it's only 15 years of distillation, right? And that there's been no professional input as such. Like, there's been whiskey people visiting and giving advice, but there hasn't been whiskey people coming and working and showing how things are done, which is pretty mind-boggling. That it's just like, yeah, this is great, you should keep going. It's like, oh, thanks for the encouragement, we'll keep pushing.
I think that's a good selling point for it, though, isn't it? Like, I can count. Well, you know, I don't have enough fingers to count how many new distilleries have told me that they had, Dr. Jim Swan come and advise them, and you know, the proliferation of STR casks. I just think, you know, sometimes it's doing something completely different can make a big change, and actually that's how you get those new flavours and new tastes coming through. And one thing I'd say about all the whiskies we've tried tonight is they've been quite interesting. Everyone, I think I'd be quite happy to just have on my shelf as an interesting dram to give to people. I quite like my sort of world whiskey anyway, but yeah, I think I'll definitely be getting a everyone's asking when you're going to drop the massive discount code, hint hint, in the chat. But yeah, I'll definitely be quite happy to stick a few bottles of this on my chat. And interesting enough, I'm a member of Ushki, so I was going to wonder how you guys got involved with Ushki.
So I was before I moved to Lewisham, I was living in Whitechapel. So when Milroy's opened in Spitalfields, my friend is the GM there. I was like, oh, do you need any help? It's like, only if you can work Friday, Saturday night. So I met Jake there. So he used to use the upstairs members bar as his office, and he'd always come in and drop off whiskey for us. And I was like, yeah, try a few of my stuff. And he really, really liked it. And it's like some of the cask samples and stuff. So I was like trying to get him to buy a cask. And then he had the idea for whiskey, and he's always going to he wanted to do a whiskey festival, which obviously got cancelled because it was supposed to be in October 2020. And he wanted just to have one Scottish whiskey. And the only rye whiskey he wanted was Stauning. He was like, and same from when he set up whiskey, he was like, you're going to be the only rye whiskey on the page. So yeah, he's tried stuff and he's a big fan. And so yeah, that was just from me working part-time in Milroy's and occasionally bringing samples into work to give to people that were curious, because I'd usually come in a Stauning t-shirt and work. People were like, what's that? It's like, oh, it's this. Do you want to try? So yeah, still waiting on Milroy to stock us though. They've said a few times that they'll do it, but they've had a lot of issues with physically stocking whiskey, because during lockdown they ended up doing so much trade online that they turned in Soho the downstairs bar into a cellar to hold stock. And then now that they can use the downstairs bar, they're like, ooh, where can we put all this stuff now? So they've changed their website and they're like, we're not taking on anything new until the new website is up and running. So I'm like waiting, because they've said a few times that they really like a few of them, but when they don't have the physical space to hold stock, it's tricky.
Yeah, you need to get a Milroy's exclusive. I tried the Matt Mira PX cask that he bought, and yeah, I'm sure it won't be long till we see a Stauning.
Well, Seymour likes them, so he was like, he really liked them, and I was like, and also I know that with the cask and stuff that it is an option. And obviously also having worked for him for like nearly a year, it's like, damn it, that's the least you can do for me, you know? And then also one of the first things Alex said when I started working was, I really want to be in Milroy's. And obviously it's one of those things where if you're in those sort of places, it makes my job easier as well, because when people are visiting or whatever, or I can take them into a whiskey bar and rather than a cocktail bar and have a conversation and buy them a dram. It's like that always makes your life easier when you can take people to places and offer them a drink and it's your product. So some of the hard life of working for a whiskey brand, having to go into a bar and buy your product to give to people.
Does anyone else have any questions for Charles?
What can we expect to see next from Stauning?
That's a good question. I really would like to see something that's older, personally. Like that German bottling of the Sauterne cask, I still don't know how they managed to buy that, because I was like, hold on a second, I would have bought that. Like, because I think, I don't know what there is right now, because I know that it's quite limited what we have of experimental casks, because a lot of stuff has gone into blends and in some way or another. And now with us scaling up globally and being put in more places and selling in more countries, we've built up stock and it's dipped down a bit. And now then there's very few casks or unique casks that are actually available right now, because there's a shortage now, because we've used a lot and we've sold quite a few single casks to independent bottlers. So now we kind of need to wait until next year before there's more options with crazy stuff, I think. And it's also, there's quite a lot now, and it, as much as the research series is lovely, we kind of need to keep the focus on the core range. because if the core range can't be maintained, then there won't be a research series either. It's like it's a balancing act.
Do you think you've settled into a core range now? That's kind of where it will sit for a while.
Well, definitely the rye and the chaos and the smoke. Chaos and rye are set. The only problem with the rye is we still don't know how the change from 230 litre stills to a lot of 800 litre stills, how much that's going to affect. So there's still might be small tweaks to the mash bill. So that 70-30 split might change, but we kind of have to wait a bit longer and see how stuff turns out after 2 years. And like once we have a bigger stock of that age and be like, so there might be minor tweaks, but the rye there might be tweaks to the mash bill, but the product itself won't change. I think the same for chaos. Smoke possibly could change again a little bit, but then again, it's also something you have to be tricky, because you can't change it too much. Like telling our distributors in the UK that, oh yeah, you've got your peat, but we're changing the recipe. It's not a good start to a relationship. It's like, oh, so now we're going to sell this, and then when it's gone, we need to restart the conversation with everybody again. It's like, yeah. So hopefully this will stay pretty similar to this, but it's so those three should be the same, I hope. But then the research series opens up all sorts of options. Obviously, the curious, that's pretty straightforward. It's new make, so no issues there. Where the bastard, I'm not sure there will be any more, because it is research series, and I don't know how many mezcal casts we've had. So research series, I expect just the curious to remain the same and the rest to be limited releases.
We've had a couple of people go back to the bastard actually.
You said.
Oh, am I coming through now? Phil said he's got Karamak on the bastard. He's gone back to it. And Barry's come up with the best tasting note of the evening for me so far. Paprika Twix for the bastard. Right, so a Twix bar with paprika on, which I think was pretty bang on for my memory of it.
I'll go back to that because I have an obsession with paprika crisps. There's a Spanish brand called Torres, and their paprika crisps are literally like crack. And I've had so many conversations with friends about them, and they're like, "Oh, I like the truffle one. I like that." I was like, "Yeah, but there's one simple reason why the paprika one is the winner, is that the truffle with a big bag, I can just about eat a whole one. The cheese one, just about eat a whole one. Paprika, if you left me alone with 10 boxes of it, I would keep eating." It's like the perfect thickness, the perfect level of spice. It's just, and then the quality of the Spanish paprika that they use. So Twiglet with paprika. I get a lot more sweetness again now. I think it's also coming from the smoke.
I think it's with that peat lingering in your mouth from the peat. When you go back to the bastard, you just get that much more caramel toffee hit off the bastard when you have that smoke still in your mouth from the peat.
It feels almost syrupy when you. It's crazy how these things change so drastically.
If only I could go back to the chaos, but it's all gone.
Huh?
I said, if only I could go back to the chaos, but it's all gone. Not like you sitting there with bottles behind you, just like pouring away. We only had a little bit to play with.
Well, you know.
I don't even want you to open that.
Oh no, that's empty. Oh, that's the old chaos. But that's the rum cask finish. That one is actually. I have a funny story with this one. So this was rum cask rye, and when I got to Whiskey Live, so this is the original bottles of whiskey. So it's quite a change.
I definitely prefer your rebrand, 100%.
Yeah. But it was also one of the issues I had. Like, I knew that the rebrand was coming, and I'm like, can you not go and get your friends to stock it? I was like, but I'm going to look like a right asshole if I get them to stock this, and then in 3 months I show them this, and it's the same price. And they're like, yeah, but still, we need to sell some whiskey. I was like, yeah, but I can't sacrifice my business relationships like that. Like, I'd rather wait. No, so this rye whiskey that was in here, it's empty now. So I think that's what kind of secured my job for quite a while. Was so we were at Whiskey Live, and we were setting up. I was like, oh, that's the rum cask. I really want to try it. It's like, what, you haven't tried it? I was like, no. I don't know nothing about it. I just saw online that there was a rum cask. And Alex pours me a dram. And I go, how did you get a plantation cask? And he's like, how did you know that's a plantation cask? I was like, oh, they have very unique character that goes through all of their products. It's like, well, I'm impressed. That's well picked out. I was like, is that Billy's? And he's like, fuck off. You didn't know. You're having me. I was like, no, honestly, I don't know. I just know you have a rum cask. I was like, well, we have Belize and we have someone else. We have another cask from Plantation, but that's the Belize that we bottled. I was like, okay. It's like, how did you know that? It's like, is that baseline funk that goes in all the Plantation? And I've spoken to people about who works with rum, and they're like, absolutely, there's a specific note in all of the Plantation that just goes.
We've got some rivals for you in here. I think Ben's looking for the Scotland brand ambassador job. So he says, who's selling this in Scotland? I've got some time to punt this to all the whiskey bars in Scotland. So I think he's got a very rose-tinted view of your role, but he's willing to put in the miles to make it work.
Well, technically, I'm the whole of the UK, unfortunately.
Oh.
We do have a guy from Cask who's the sales manager for Scotland, and he's based in Glasgow. So
I'm not after your job. I'm just saying I'm more than happy to hold some stock in my house for you.
So I'm like, I don't actually envy him having to go into, especially being a Glaswegian and having to go into bars in Scotland and go, do you want to try some whiskey? And then people finding out that it's Danish whiskey. It's like, there's going to be some colourful conversations.
But I genuinely, right, and I'm not just saying this to blow smoke, but I think your bottles stand out on a bar. I think the rebrands are
Exactly.
awesome. The bottles look amazing, and I think there's no denying when you taste it. Like it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter whether it's Danish or wherever it's.
No, but
it's
you know,
amazing.
there's whiskey snobs everywhere. So you never know. So the house I'm in now, the guy, my friend who was in it here, he writes for Whiskey Magazine, and the night we met, we were at a cognac tasting, and he said to come and meet him at the Single Malt Society. He was an ambassador. I was like, I don't really drink Scotch, but come and see me at work. And I was working at a restaurant that only had American whiskey. And he's like, oh, I don't drink bourbon. I was like, I didn't say bourbon, I said American whiskey. And we formed a solid friendship from that. And he only drinks bourbon because of meeting me. And it's the same with Greg from Great Drams. Do you know him? So Greg came into that same restaurant and sat down at the bar and went, can I have a whiskey? I was like, what would you like? And I can't remember what he asked for. I think he asked for an Alcontussion or something silly. I was like, oh, we only have American whiskey. And he's like, I don't drink bourbon. It's like, I didn't say bourbon, I said American whiskey. It's like, what do you usually drink? And Greg as well says that if he hadn't met me, he wouldn't be drinking bourbon. So there's a lot of preconceptions about certain styles of whiskey. And I think we're being Nordic, don't have the tie-ups to any of that. Like,
I put in the chat earlier, shows. I'm interested. You said the rye had launched in the US, or was about to launch in the US.
it was supposed to be launched in 2019. We had the prototype of the bottle, and we were supposed to launch, I think it was supposed to be in February 2020.
Because I think it'll be interesting, because my personal experience is Americans know what they like and like what they know.
Yeah.
If they buy that as an American, I know it's not an American rye whiskey, but they go, oh, hey, it's a rye whiskey, we're going to buy this. They're not going to get what they expect.
But it's still very much in the style of an American whiskey. Like, it's a little less sweet and a little less spicy than an American rye. But it's still got all the cornerstones of a rye whiskey, or what an American would expect from a rye whiskey.
I'm not sure I agree with that. I think it's quite different to what an American would think a rye whiskey. If they bought a rye whiskey, if you give them that, I don't think they would. And not in a bad way. I mean, I'm just saying, you know, if you bought something and you were expecting one thing, I think you get another thing with this.
Yes, I fully understand what you mean, but it's not a Rittenhouse. It's certainly not Bullet, but it's different. But there's a lot of the rye characteristics, but I think it's also the big quantity of barley, whereas most of the Americans will have corn for sweetness, where our sweetness entirely comes from the cask.
I think it's more complex than a lot of their stuff as well.
But I didn't buy I can't remember when I bought Scotch a few weeks ago. I think that's the first bottle of Scotch I've bought in 20 years. But I used to only drink American whiskey because when I was 17, I was drinking Lagavulin and Lafroig, and I just went off it completely because I got tired of the peats. And then I got introduced to American whiskey in, I think it was around 2001, something like that, that I got introduced to Buffalo Trace, and I was like, whoa, hello. And also the pricings and everything. And people were always slacking it off, and I was always defending it, going like, no, it's equally as complex as Scotch. It's just a simpler complexity that's easier for most people to understand. And let's be honest, a lot of the big, bold Scotches, most people who buy them don't even understand what they're drinking. They're just buying it to impress their friends. And
and I think, I don't know.
the American whiskey has a simpler complexity that's easier to understand and enjoy. And the amount of people I've turned on to American whiskey, when I've shown them like how different they can be and how challenging they can be, some of them as well. It's all those things are joys to drink, but like the Carlila Distillers Edition was the turning point for me personally. That had me looking up Scotch prices again, and then obviously helping at Milroy's 2 days a week, I ended up rekindling my love with Scotch.
I think the other thing for me with Stauning as well, and I guess is a question for everyone else in the call, is Stauning's added to my collection of Stauning, Mackmyra, Cotswold, Kilchoman, of whiskies that are not massively aged, but wow, like, you know, it just shows that you don't have to have a 10, 12, 15, 18-year-old whiskey to have a good whiskey. I mean, those distilleries I just mentioned are all incredibly young, but the stuff they're putting out is that Wax House edition 4 of Cotswolds. I mean, I'm drinking that at the minute. That Stauning stuff. Sorry, Charles, go.
There was a red wine cask from Cotswold, which is absolutely mental.
Yeah, and like people keep saying for such a young whiskey, but they stand up on their own. You don't need to say for such a young whiskey at the end of it. They just stand up on their own. My
friend who I did the campfire whiskey trick with for his leaving party actually helped set up Cotswold Distillery before he left for Japan. So he was the first distiller there.
Oh, it's good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a brilliant question from Barry, who I think is suffering the whiskey munchies the same as me. He asked, is there any recommended pairings for these bottlings? So anything
you say pairings? I haven't even dwelled into that too much. Cheese is always good in Denmark, but cheese is good everywhere. Definitely burgers for the smoke. 100% barbecue fodder. Like, the rye, this is going to sound so stupid. I really like it with pastries. I've actually recreated a Danish pastry with it by washing it with butter. But yeah, even Irish coffees with rye and the chaos as well. But I guess Indian food as well would be good, because there's some nice switches between the spice and the different expressions.
I think Ben's got the best pairing. He says he recommends pairing the Pete with the Bastard. So just back-to-back whiskey. I don't know what Barry thinks of that, but I'm sure he'd be agreeable.
Should we try and do a blend? That is the. Let's see what happens.
So you were talking about Mackmyra earlier, and Phil's a big Mackmyra fan, but he reckons you guys might just be the most exciting world whiskey distillery that he's come across, which I think is pretty. Coming from Big Red, that's pretty big praise, to be honest.
I got to say, I've tried a lot of Mackmyra, and I like what they do, but I think a lot of it is hit and miss. And quality-wise, it tends to be a little bit under what I expect when I look at the pricing. I mean, they're lovely people. I know they're a brand ambassador here in the UK, but definitely quality-wise, I think we've got the edge. So, but I love how they've been absolutely mental, and I'm sure that once they decide to stop messing about, because they do a lot of that, and actually do a little bit more core product, they'll have some amazing stuff, because they've done some stupid shit as well with that distillery, with like from an innovation point of view, and it's just like, oh, what have you done that? It's like, because we can. Which I like that a lot, and that's very much in the vein of what we've done as well.
Well, Richard, their brand ambassador, is a childhood friend, so I'll definitely keep that to myself. But I think, yeah, I think it's
it's not a bad thing, but it's more that they have so many different products coming out that it's hard to keep track sometimes.
I think it's an interesting proposition, isn't it? Because, you know, what are you about? At the end of the day, it's a business, and you got to make money. So if you have the product and people are going to buy it, it was kind of like a question. Like, I don't know how much, you know, as a brand ambassador, you're involved in this, but there's certain brands that I really liked and bought whiskies off, and then they decided that they were going to bring out non-age statements at £140 a bottle and all sorts of nonsense. And I've just made a personal decision that, do you know what, there's loads of whiskies out there in the world, and I'm not buying a no-age statement average whiskey at 140 quid just because it's limited edition. I think Stauning have brought out stuff, you know, there is a limit to the number of bottles you've done on certain things, but it's like 60 or 70 quid. And I think that's a great price for the whiskey that you have. But as soon as you start to decide you're going to sell a bottle of whiskey at 150 quid, then I start questioning.
Exactly. And a lot of our stuff as well is having stocks. So the price actually went down in Denmark by like, I think it was 20 quid, because they're like, oh, we've changed to the bottle. Now we made some money back. Now we have stock coming of age, and we can pass that on to people who supported us. So we're going to drop the price. And that's always been the end game, has not been making money per se. There's obviously business in it. But building up the stocks, part of the end game has been to get the overall price down. So we may not end up making the same profit margins, but we'll still end up making the same profits, because we sell we'll have the same turnover but smaller profit margins, but we'll sell more product, because
I mean,
the aim is to push the price down, and also like to compete with people like Rittenhouse, for instance, with the rye. It's like we need to get down to another £6-7 for the on trade. But like right now, people are like, whoa, really? When I'm like, no, it's the same price for the on trade as Michter's. And people are like, what? Oh, then I'll switch. It's like, thank you. And it's like, if we can get below that by £5, and then go like, it's £5 cheaper than the Michter's that you use currently in this rye cocktail, then suddenly there's a whole different avenue that opens up. So that's one of the end games with building up the warehouse capacity, is not to make more money because now we have more whiskey to sell. It's actually make it more and more affordable, because obviously when we first started and all we had was was these bottles. We needed to recoup the cost, and it was younger whiskey, and there's a cost involved with that. Whereas the older whiskey you have, to many extents and purposes, you can sell it cheaper, because if you have enough of it, and also if you blend it correctly with older whiskey, you can sell, like the rye, for instance. If we can start blending in some 5-year-old whiskey with the 3-year-old whiskey and get the same flavor profile, we can probably drop the price again. And that's the whole end game, is getting to have enough stock at the right age, so we can drop the price and pass the saving on to the consumer, and then recoup that by selling more.
It's refreshing to hear that, because I feel there's certain people within the industry that go the opposite way, which is, well, if we can sell it and there's a demand for it, let's just push the price up, because it'll sell anyway.
When I saw the Instagram post about that, it's like, good news, Denmark. We now have enough stock. We can lower the price for you. And they literally just cut it. I think it was 20 pounds across the line.
I mean, I went through a phase of like, oh, I need that bottle, I want that bottle, and stuff like that. And now I've just totally let it fly by me. There's hundreds of whiskies out there that I want to taste, and if the price is ridiculous, then I'll just call it as ridiculous and move on from it.
Yeah, there's very few bottles that I'm interested in to buy, because I can try them, but how many bottles of whiskey do I need at home? Because I don't buy to hoard, and I don't buy to keep. Like, I have one bottle that's not open. Well, I have more than one that's not open, but I have one that hasn't been opened. And it's approaching silly money, especially compared to what I paid. But I've been willing to open it. And I've put it in somebody's hand and told them they could open it. And they said, all I want was the picture. I have it now. Save it for something else.
I'm the same. I messaged Tom the other day, and a couple of the other guys in the group as well. I've got over £2,000 worth of whiskey that I bought, probably right at the start of my whiskey journey I was probably going to flip it, to be honest. But now I'm at a point where I want to open it and I want to drink it. But my problem is it's £2,000 worth of whiskey. So I'm looking at potentially offering the CEOs, bottle splits on all of it. But it's not for a profit. It's, I just want to cover the cost of what I bought it for, and happy to share it and drink it.
Right.
They're more expensive. It might be 15 quid a dram because they're really exclusive and expensive bottles. But I'd rather do that than give money to an auction site, quite frankly.
So, Charles, we were just wondering what your address was, because Phil's offering to bring as many Toro paprika crisps as you can handle. We'll all bring a bottle, and we can open them up and have a nice evening.
SE 1370B. I forgot the recording.
That'll be on YouTube tomorrow.
You'll just get loads of drams turn up knowing this group. There'll just be random drams from everyone.
I think Phil's just ordered an Uber.
Well, so with those dream drams, so when I was, my girlfriend still refers to this place I worked as, when can you make mash money again? Because I was making really good money, and because I didn't really go out, and I was like, oh, I've got all this money coming in. I'm not spending it because too tired to go out. I can't be asked. I was like, I ended up spending a lot of money on auctions. I bought a lot of random stuff and a lot of American whiskey as well, really cheap, like stuff from the 60s and the 70s. And you're like, what? You can get a half gallon of Jim Beam from 1972 that's guaranteed minimum 5 years old for £40. Why not? And I was buying a lot of these, and so a lot of it is like, I don't care. I'm like, I'll just open it sometimes and be like, oh, let's try this. And so I don't really have anything that's sacred because of that. And that one bottle that's kind of sacred is like, I really fucking wish I had the option to buy two, and I only had the money for one, but at the same time, I did pay in 2 installments. But I'm like, if I'd had 2 bottles of that, I'd probably be sitting on 2 now and going like, don't really want to open it. But I'm like, I really want to open it. I'm like, and I've put it in my friend's father-in-law's hand, and he's taken a photo, and because I said, so I went to the christening of the daughter, and I said, oh, when you're in London next, tell me, I'll bring the bottle, and then we can open it. And he's like, oh, that's very nice. And then he was like, refused to open the bottle. And my old colleague told me that somebody seen a bottle go for $20,000, and I paid £400. I'm like, and it was like, that was after I was told that somebody paid $20,000 for the bottle. I still gave it to my friend's father-in-law and said, if you want to open it, we open it now. And it's like, because I've tried it and I know how good it is. And I paid £400 or £415 when I got it. And for me, I've spent that money already. So now it's just sitting there, and it's like, it's free to open because I've paid for it. And it's so long ago I paid for it. I've got it for like 5 years. And it's like, it's paid for. And there's a lot of this stuff that I bought at auctions and stuff over the years where it's like, oh, it's been in there for like 3 years. It's paid for. So it's like, if I open it, it doesn't really matter because I don't care about the cost anymore, because, oh, even if I paid £300 for it, which I never did for anything at auction. I think the highest I've ever gone, like 150 quid. Even if I own a 150 quid bottle from an auction, it's not really a 150 quid bottle because I'm not going to get it back. I might be able to flip it and double my money. But right now, if it's sitting there and I paid 150 quid, but I paid that 150 quid 3 years ago, that's 150 quid 3 years ago. That doesn't matter now. So now it's a free bottle because that 150 quid was available back then. So that's the way I look at these purchases. Is like, that money was paid ages ago, and it's like, it's not going to make any difference to me now because I have the bottle in front of me, but I can't just switch it to the money.
Phil's offering 3 bags of paprika crisps for it.
I don't think that one bottle is going for that because that is something unique. It's the E.H. Taylor Warehouse C, if you know about that.
Make it 30,000 packets, Phil, and you might have a deal.
Just out of interest, do you know how much a dram of the Noma Stauning is? No idea. Imagine it's not cheap. Nothing's cheap at Noma.
I don't know. I'll find out when I go there.
Invited as a guest.
We have a really good relationship with them. So it's like, one of the first things Alex actually said to me was, oh, if it's restaurant places and they need a little notch, just tell them if they want to do a collaboration with Noma, we can probably sort it out. And it's like, for him to physically say that we could probably work something out with the right restaurant about doing a collaboration. Yeah. There's a special bond there for him to actually say that, because you can't say that and then I go and say that to a restaurant and then they can't make it happen because we all know who looks like the twat.
I mean, the thing is, if you get invited, trolls, it is all about diversity these days. And I'm an Irishman living in Scotland, so I tick a couple of boxes. Take me along. More than happy to fill your diversity box for that.
That's not enough box ticking for me. So Mark, who used to live here, so now I've added Swedish to it. So he claims to be Irish, but he was born in London. And then somebody made the joke online that he was also part Cherokee. So now we have Mark, who's the most Irish, Scottish, part Cherokee, Swedish Englishman.
Well, I think that's the thing. More people claim to be Irish than are actually from the island of Ireland.
Yeah. Well, so his family is Irish, and I think his dad is actually born in Ireland, but he was born in London because his dad was working here, and then they moved to Aberdeen. And and he grew up in Aberdeen, and then he moved back to London. And he still claims to be Irish. So his wife is Irish, but yeah. So his uncle is Pat Jennings. So he's definitely Irish. Yes.
Wow. I mean, wow. His uncle is Pat Jennings. Wow. Pat Jennings. Wow.
Yeah. So, but that thing is like claiming to be Irish. Like, you were born in fucking London. I'm like,
but when your uncle's Pat Jennings, whoa, boom, clank, that is a name drop.
But you're born in London and you grew up in Aberdeen. And then when you find out that he's trying to claim to be Irish, but he grew up in Aberdeen and they had to escape from the football ground because Dad, in his stupidity and having 2 kids with him, allowed the kids to go to Aberdeen football ground for a game against Rangers.
Oh yeah, Aberdeen.
Wearing England football shirts in '92.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, but we were just wearing England shirts because it was '92. It's like, you went to an Aberdeen game against Rangers in England shirts. I don't care how old you are, you're fucking lucky to be alive.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And still he claims, he's like, yeah, I'm Irish. It's like, no, you're not. You're English. You're born in England. It's like, yeah, I got an Irish passport. It's like, yeah, but still. Anyway, I've got his house now and he's Swedish now, so.
I'm going to head off here, but cheers, Tom and Johnny, for organising this, and thanks, trolls. If I'm not your name right at all, sorry about that. But cheers for coming on. It's been a really interesting chat.
You're welcome. I've enjoyed all of your company, so.
Cheers, Che. It was good to have you tonight, and I guess it's probably a good point from my point of view as well to say goodnight. But Charles, like, amazing for you to spend 2.25 hours with us.
I could spend all night, but apparently Ben has drunk all the whiskey.
Well, we'd be really interested if there is any curious. If you let us know, we'll do a bottle split of that for definite.
Well, that's definitely curious available. I'll see what happens. I'm getting some miniatures, so I might be able to get some miniatures sent to you. I think that might be a good solution.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously don't have to promise anything, but we'd be more than receptive to that.
Yeah, there was a little bit of a debate with the curious because of that little fucking crossed out whiskey. They're like, eh. But apparently there are stickers available. So I don't know if I have to. I think I asked for 2 cases of it, which would be 100 bottles. And if it's 100 bottles, I can definitely spare for you guys.
Well, that sounds amazing. What was everyone's favourite dram of the night? Che, before you go, what was your favourite tonight?
I have to say, it'd probably be the Peak. The Peak was fantastic.
Johnny, what were you thinking?
It's close between Pete and the Chaos. I reckon the Chaos just nudges it for me.
I know what Phil's going to go for, but Phil?
I thought the peat was absolutely superb, and I still keep going back to the rye, which is also way beyond what I thought it would be. Superb.
Thank you.
And Ben, I know you've drunk 3/4 of a bottle of rye, but could you see yourself drinking a whole bottle of something else? In that
Definitely. I think the rye as an introduction has been amazing, but I really like the Chaos, and because I'm more interested in like interesting whiskies, and I think the Chaos is like probably one of the most interesting 50 mils I've drunk. And that was amazing.
And Barry apologises because he's had a hellish night with the young baby in the house and night shifts recently. So he apologises, but he says his order is Chaos, Pete,
Yeah, this popped up.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to have to go Pete as well because I'm a sucker for Pete. But I think yours was just different enough to make it stand out from the crowd. So
I think it's so different from your average Pete. And it's like people keep asking me for the RPM stuff, and I'm like, I actually don't know. And it's like I don't even think it's on the website. Like, I don't even think the guys in Denmark knows, because it's like it's not a selling point. So it's like a lot of peated whiskies are like, oh yeah, we're this much. And it's like, just make a good whiskey, and if it's good, people will buy it. Like if you're buying it purely on how much peat is in there, you're not going to get that good a whiskey sometimes. Like when I've been helping at Milroy's and people have gone in and gone, what's the most peated whiskey you have? It's like, how many whiskeys are you going to have tonight? Because if you're going to start with Octomore 10.4, you're not going to enjoy any other whiskey after that. So it's like there's a balance to everything.
we've I can definitely agree with that. I mean,
Barry's changing his opinion.
I think I don't know if he's changing his
Talking
opinion.
about his newborn.
Yeah.
Is he got to call the baby Stauning now?
Yeah, Phil says Bastard covers all bases for his kids at home, and Barry definitely
Barry
agrees.
said yes. He's renaming the baby.
And the dog, and the wife.
It makes it easy because you can buy them all a whiskey with their name on it now.
Well, obviously, so where you're based then? Because I think one of the shows I've signed up for is Midlands whiskey.
I think pretty much everyone's going to Midlands whiskey from the COs, other than Ben, who might reconsider now.
Yeah, I'm just outside Edinburgh, so I'm quite a distance away.
Yeah.
Apparently we're only allowed to bring stuff that's on the Nichols and Perks website. But at the same time, we're also encouraged to bring a specialty dram, which is like, how does that fit in?
So, I was reading the rules, and you're not allowed to bring any samples, obviously, as a participant. But I know lots of people sort of take samples for their friends to swap over when they're at whiskey festivals. So, obviously, a bit stricter at Nichols and Perks. But we're hoping that there might be some car samples under your desk, Trolls, at this at the Nichols and Perks festival.
I'll get some more sorted out. I'm nearly out of the ones I had, but then again, I've had them for nearly 2 years, and it's like, yeah. So
To be honest,
that'd sort it out, wouldn't it?
Sorry?
For me, you with your car boots, just lift your boots up.
Yeah.
That's where the real action happens, yeah? I've been to whiskey festivals, I know how it works.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I'm actually going to a whiskey festival in Edinburgh in, I think it's October, that I bought a ticket for 2 years ago. It's just been postponed because of COVID so long. Like I
thought it was one of those Scottish things where you wake up and it's like, I bought a ticket for something. I don't remember when.
No, that's after the whiskey festival.
No, so funnily enough, like when I did that whiskey live with the rum cask, and I asked Alex, I was like, have you got anything? And he's like, what do you mean? It's like, well, we need something. It's like, what do you mean? It's like, we need something under the counter. We need something special for when people come and ask. It's like, people ask that? It's like, yes. And luckily, it's like 3 months after I'd done he'd sent me all the cask samples. And it's like, I asked for a couple of cask samples. And he was like, yeah, I'll get somebody to sort out a couple. And then the couple of cask samples ended up being 9 different casks with 800 ml bottles of each. I'm like, it's like happy days, but still, like, I wanted to get a couple of cask samples so I could show people, like, oh, this is different things we're doing. And they're like,
well, there's the inside information for the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people still in this call. That when you see a Stauning stand,
yeah,
ask for what's under the counter.
So I ended up bringing it to bring it down, and that first day, everybody went nuts for the port cask, and it's like, you need to bring more tomorrow. And then we ended up doing a blend of 2 of them because we didn't have enough. And I think Alex came back and realized there wasn't enough at home of it to actually make the blend, because I can't remember. I think we did the port with something else on the second day and blended them, and that blend was fucking phenomenal. I think it was port and Madeira. It was like, no, not enough to make an actual bottling. Is that an actual poster, by the way, Tom?
No, I thought I'd honour Stauning with a background to fit. I try and get my background. Halfway through, I thought I should have probably got a photo of the still house showing the 24 stills, but yeah, beauty of Zoom.
That still house is insane.
Yeah, I was really gutted actually, because when they did the Somerton tour, they couldn't record any of it. Like, for some reason, the recording messed up. So I was on another tasting and completely missed it. So I'm hoping, or I'm half tempted to buy a bottle for my dad for Father's Day, just so we can do the tour together, to be honest.
Like, I know I've banged on about it, but it was class. Like, it was so good.
Literally, that was a talk on Somerton's Discord for like a whole week.
It's such a fortunate thing, because it all came out of Alex being banned last minute flying here, because there was the thing with the mink strain in Denmark. And they're like, no, nobody from Denmark.
But it was also trolls. It was like I don't know the guy. I've only seen him on that, but Alex is a bit of a dude as well. Like, he did like the tasting, and he was like just walking around this distillery in the dark, and then he'd come to the next bit and go, so now we're going to sample this, and there'd be a bottle of this, and like, you know, it was like really well done. And then the best bit of it was, for me, which I find
I want to follow him one day, because I know there's always like, oh, you're probably going to lose me for about 30 seconds now.
Yeah, he did that. Yeah, he did that as he was walking through. But the best bit was, he was like doing his cool, like, James Bond, you know, this whiskey is so amazing and stuff. And then things started going beep, 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 beep.
Oh, so you had the fire alarm going
like, oh shit, I think that's a security alarm. Somebody set it. So like, it had to go off and like phone the police and stuff and like say, no, I'm the owner, it's here, or whatever it was that was good on.
He talked about this in the meeting the other day. So we had a meeting with him and our marketing people in Denmark and cask, our importers and distributors. And it happened on another tasting as well the other day. And it's like, and I was like, yeah, it happened again, but I think I've sorted the problem. But is it not nice to see how a Danish person doesn't panic? And they're like, oh yeah,
well, it was funny because when the alarm was going off and Alex was like, all right, I need to go and sort this out. I'll be back in a minute. And then the chat was like, it's going to come back and a Danish SWAT team is going to be like walking about with like target down.
we tend not to panic, like.
No, he was very calm about it. In fairness,
Yeah,
very calm.
And like I did a training with him at there's a place in London which is really, it's a bit weird in some ways, but somebody decided that there was a market for a hybrid between Japanese and Scandinavian place, and I went and did the training there, and Alex was on a video link, and it kept popping out the link, and he was like, "Oh, if it was the connection to the monitor, just fucking buy a projector and stick it on your invoice." I was like, "No, that. Thank you, but that wasn't the problem. The problem was the fucking internet kept dropping out in the restaurant." And we like realized after, it's like, actually what we need to do is just me and him do a tour where I ask questions and then he walks through, and then we do it again where we ask all the geek questions like enzymes, fermentation times, yeast, mass ton temperatures, blah blah blah, and do all the geeky shit and have it on video. So essentially I could do this with you now and be like, oh yeah, it's the video link I'm just putting on, and that, because some of the stuff that came out of that, Alex not being able to travel, is one of the best things ever, because realizing that we can do those virtual tours, but also that we can do those trainings, and just by Alex walking through the distillery with me and having two versions. One is like normal, 3 drams, one geeky. Yeah, this is what happens when we turn the grain in the malting lane, blah, blah, blah. This is what happens because of the water. And then this is how that thing that spins the wash out of the mash, because that thing is fucking mental. Like it looks like the inside of a tumble dryer, and it's like, oh, now we get everything out. Like, and the people who've been and seen it from other distilleries, they're like, that's the best thing. It's like, who made that? It's like, oh, it's a guy down the road. And then like, what? Who decided? It's like, oh, I did. It's like, but a guy down the road made it. It's like, yes.
Is Denmark your best market, or like where's your best market relative? Like obviously because like you'll sell more bottles potentially in the US because they've got a bigger population, but like relatively, where is your best market?
I think right now, quantity-wise, it might be Germany, but that's a good question actually, because UK has been struggling a bit, and it's been tricky here because of all the lockdowns, and they're like, oh, lockdowns, but then different areas.
But I find that really weird, because you're not an on-trade whiskey. You're not a. I don't go into pubs and find Stauning on the shelf.
No, but we were aiming at doing a big push, and obviously on-trade helps build off-trade. So people will come into a bar and see a whiskey on the back bar, or try a whiskey in a cocktail, and then seek it out. And a lot of that got taken away. But in Germany, they've had a lot of they've really pushed it. So apparently in Germany, they were like, oh yeah, you're just going to talk to to shops and say, do you want to stock it? And I was like, yeah, we can't really do that here. And they're like, oh, but you can in Germany. It's like, yeah, right now here. And they're like, Germany's in lockdown as well. You can have meetings. Like, yeah, you can have meetings too, but you can't just rock up.
Yeah.
So for me to have a meeting with a whiskey shop, I need to call them up and go, is it okay for me to come and see you and we can taste some whiskeys?
If
they say no, then
it's been frightening. So I'm a commercial director of a professional sports team, and we have like alcohol partners, and the people who were on trade have fallen off a cliff and are like in negotiations with us to get money back, and like, you know, struggling and panicking and stuff like that. The alcohol brands that were selling in supermarkets and online and to people in the house are like going, hey, lockdown, hey, amazing. Yeah, it's been like, you know, their sales have went through the roof, quite frankly. And it's like two different strategies.
Because it's like, oh, selling straight through the supermarkets has been a good cost in Scotland because, oh, that minimum sale price is like.
Yeah, but it's the only way people could get alcohol because the pubs were shut, so everyone was going to the pub and buying, you know, whiskey and gin.
Somebody took shared a picture the other day. I think it was from Glasgow. It's like nature's healing. It's like so you pub that's close to one of the markets or something. And there's two people queuing outside at 5:40 in the morning. It's like.
That was Leuven's probably in St Andrews, who had a couple of bottles available of something that was like, yeah.
No, it was just outside the pub.
Oh, it was just outside the pub. All right, fair.
Yeah.
I mean, there's still a pub in Aberdeen that has a brass plaque proudly on the door that says no toilet facilities for females. So, you know.
How would it feel for them to get a bunch of
Actually, can I just say, Tom, are we still recording this? Do you want to just stop that?
It's on tape. It doesn't matter.
I think we've gone beyond recording now.
I'm happy to call a recording night there, so anyone can stay on and do freely. But I think before we finish, just a massive thanks to Charles for sticking with us this long and being so open and honest about the distillery and the brand and everything. It's been a really interesting chat, and I hope everyone watching on Catch Up will appreciate all the effort that's gone in. So thanks, and thanks to Johnny for doing all the splitting as well.